What's up everybody, it's Mike here, and for today's video we're going to be using Starry Landscape Stacker, but I'm also going to add a little twist to it. So something I like to do is for a cleaner foreground, besides using the stacking software like Starry Landscape Stacker or whatever you're using for a PC side of things, I like to take really long exposures of the foreground at a lower ISO and stack that as well, just to get a cleaner image overall. So I'm going to jump through a couple pictures from when I was in Maine at Little Hunters Beach, and let's just jump right into this. So as you see here on my screen, here's the Milky Way dead center, just about in this cove, and you got Mars right here, you got Jupiter over here, and this is a 10-shot stack that we're going to be doing right here. So you can see the Milky Way slowly drifting across. Now the foreground's kind of dark. If I raise the shadows up, you could get a little, you can see a little bit better, but decent amount of noise in there. I shot these 10 images at 14 millimeters, f3.5, 20-second shutter, ISO 6400. Now you're probably wondering why 3.5 and why 20 seconds. The reason I did that is just to kind of bring back some of the sharpness in the stars. When you shoot f2.8 in the corners, they tend to get a little blurry and soft just because of the 2.8 aperture. And I did 20 seconds because I didn't want too much of a star trail. So those are the reasons why I went with those numbers, and I'm at ISO 6400 just to compensate for the fact that I'm shooting at 3.5 and at 20 seconds. Now the next thing I did after taking these 10 shots was I took 4 other shots that were around anywhere between 90 seconds to almost 2 minutes. So I got this shot right here, which is 89 seconds, another one at 100 seconds, 174, and 101. Now I was just kind of experimenting at different lengths of time. I was kind of just counting in my head when I was doing that. I didn't have a timer going, so that's why they're not consistent. But that doesn't really matter because the fact that I was able to take 4 shots, I'm going to stack these and it's going to reduce the noise pretty well in my shadow areas, so I could use this foreground instead of the foreground from these images, just because my ISO for these very long exposures was at 2500, and I was at the same f-stop at 3.5, but you can see already in this one shot these rocks are much cleaner, and so is the water as well, versus if I raise the shadows on one of these images. You can even see you get a little bit of color banding going on here. So I'm going to leave the images as they are without doing any adjustments. We're just going to export them as TIFF files. In my case, I'm doing JPEGs just to kind of speed the process up, because when I'm recording these videos, if I'm doing big files, and especially TIFF files because they're usually pretty large, it will slow down my computer. So I'm just going to do everything in JPEG for this video. But you should be doing them in TIFF, just that way, just so you get the most control over your images as far as white balance and everything else. So that's just a tip that I recommend you guys stick with. Alright, so now what we want to do is open up our files in Starry Landscape Stacker, or if you're using Sequator for the PC, you want to do that as well. No thank you. Alright, so I'm opening my 10 images. Now we're just going to paint in the red dots for the sky. I like to make a border. in this tree line area, see how some of the red dots went into the foreground? We want to get rid of those, so we're just going to erase those away. Once you're done with that, just hit Find Sky. And this blue mass represents the sky, and you can see some of it went into the foreground, which we're going to have to remove that. And not all the sky was selected. You can see it had some issues with the planets here. So what we're going to do is make sure this is on sky, and we're going to paint parts that it missed. So go around the edges. A lot of times there might be a couple parts that aren't really selected around the edges. And we're going to zoom in. If you hold down the space key, you can move around. And we're going to resize this brush and get really close to the horizon line. Now it's really good with this program. You don't have to go crazy getting in between all these trees. You just have to get the bigger areas, and for the most part, it's pretty good. Alright, I might speed this up just so you guys don't have to see me paint every little piece of this picture. Alright, so once you're done with the sky, you want to select ground and remove any part of the ground that got painted blue. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to do align and save. Now they've updated Starry Landscape Stacker, so you have a few more options here. You could change the stacking mode from mean, median, max, or min. So you could cycle through these. I recommend zooming in to see the effects of it. So on max, you can see it still picked up some star trail effect in the tree area because I didn't have it perfectly masked out. At min, it seems like there's still a decent amount of noise. I'd recommend probably sticking with median or mean. Alright, we're going to save it as mean. And yes. Make sure that's saved in the folder that you specified. It's right here. And you close that program. Alright, so now what we could do is carry this new stacked image into Lightroom. And import it. And I'm going to make this a 4-star. Okay, so I have my stacked image in here, and if we zoom in, you can see it's very little noise in the star area. And if we raise our shadows, it's a lot better than a single image. Let me show you guys a side-by-side comparison. Okay, so on the right we have a single image, and on the left we have stacked images, and you can see it's cleaned it up quite nicely. I raised the shadows just to kind of take a gander at this area. You can see there is a little bit of weird color noise going on because of the high ISO that we use to capture this image, and that's the reason why I am also doing an additional stack for the foreground only, because sometimes you do get these really, the magenta colors and the blacks and stuff like that when you are raising the shadows. Alright, so while this image is much cleaner than a single image, if we start to raise the shadows just to kind of give us something a little more appealing in the foreground, it's still a decent amount of noise in there, and you get the magenta colors coming out in the shadow area. So let's jump over to the really long exposures I took, and I increased the shadows on these, and you can see it handled the noise much better just because I was at a lower ISO of 2500. And I'll go through these. Alright, so this one I kind of want to tone it down a little bit more. You don't want to make it unrealistic. We want to make it so it's easy to blend this foreground with our sky. So these are pretty good. They vary a little bit in brightness, but that's okay. We're going to select them and select our stacked image. Go to Photo, Edit in, Open as layers in Photoshop. Alright, so now that I have the images opened up in Photoshop, I could bring the Starry landscape stacker image and put that to the bottom. And we're going to zoom in on our foreground images. Now what I'm going to do is just go through each one and make sure that they're in alignment with each other. So I'm going to turn off the top layer, and that looked good. That looks good. And that one looks good. So they all look like they're in alignment. If yours are not, because of, let's say you hit the tripod or whatever, you might want to auto align your images or manually align them. Next thing we want to do is select all the images, and go to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Objects. Okay, so now we have our smart object, and what we want to do is apply a stack mode to that. So go back to Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode, Mean. Alright, so this is going to average those images together, reducing the noise greatly, and also kind of create a longer star trail effect. Now if we zoom in here, we could see it's even more clean than before. We have some hot pixels, but I'll show you how to get rid of those. But let's compare it to our Starry landscape stacker image. So I'm going to turn off this eye right here, and you can see the foreground of Starry landscape stacker. It's clean compared to a single picture, but compared to a lower ISO, longer exposure foreground image, it is like night and day. This is a lot of magenta. The rocks don't look that sharp, and it's still some noise in there, especially if you were to print this really large or sell it to a stock agency. So if we click on this one, you can see you have a lot of color back in the rocks, and it looks to be sharper as well. So now we just have to blend that sky from Starry landscape stacker with this foreground, and it's actually relatively easy. What I like to do is make a copy, and that way if I make a mistake I could just go back and adjust it. Now we could leave this foreground layer on top, and I'm just going to rasterize the layer and create a mask. Now with black selected and the paintbrush, I'm going to raise this up. And we're going to put the hardness on 0. And the opacity, we can put that at 100%. And now because I didn't move the tripod, it's really easy to blend these images together. Just painting away the sky portion. As you get closer to the horizon, you can lower the opacity and just kind of blend this in nicely. It's okay if you go past the horizon a little bit. The noise isn't that terrible at this part of the image. Now you can see here, you have a little bit of that magenta tone from that from the Starry Landscape stack layer. And if you go to a smaller brush and lower the opacity, you could kind of blend the two and just get rid of some of that magenta. You don't want to go too much because you'll start introducing star trails. So just do it very carefully, and that looks pretty good. I think there's a boat moving right here, so I have a little light trail going on. I'm going to get rid of that. I believe this is a lighthouse out here. I'm not sure which one, but I could leave that in the picture or Photoshop it out. That's just kind of personal preference. For this tutorial, we'll just leave it in. Alright, so that looks pretty well blended. We zoom out here. So now you got a well-lit foreground that's a lot cleaner, with nice sharp stars, and we could flatten the image once we're satisfied with it. I'm going to make another copy, and I'll show you guys how to get rid of these hot pixels in the foreground, and it will affect these stars, so you're going to have to make a mask and protect the sky. So let's create a layer mask, click back on the foreground, well, the overall image now, it's one solid image. So make a layer mask, but click back on your image, go filter, noise, dust and scratches. Now you might have to play around with the radius and threshold. I was using this before, so it actually picked really good numbers that worked well for me, which was a radius of 3, threshold of 17, and as you see in the sky, it removed all my stars too. But not to worry, we will just mask that out. Even 2 and 17 is pretty good, so I'm gonna hit OK. Some people actually like some of the stars being reduced, so if you want to ever do that, this is how you would play around with that. Now I'm going to click back on my layer mask and switch to black, increase the size of the brush and the opacity to 100%, and we can just paint our stars right back in. Sometimes that dust and scratches might miss a pixel or two, and those just clone out individually, but for the most part it looks like I got everything. There's a couple right here in the trees, so let's flatten our image. And you can use spot healing brush and just clone those out. Alright, that looks pretty good. Once you're satisfied, just save it. So from here, you can kind of just do whatever your personal preference is as far as editing goes. I hope this helps. Please like and subscribe. Take care. Bye.